Welcome to episode 3 of the Temple Talks podcast, where we support you to improve your business management systems, share knowledge, and hear from special guests across various industry sectors. And now, over to your host Bob Hughes from Temple QMS with our special guests Errol Givans and David Davies.
Welcome to Temple Talks. Today we're doing a discussion on cost of quality, and what an amazing place to be in. We're actually in our brand new offices in the centre of Birmingham Jewellery Quarter to discuss cost of quality. And I'm joined today by two renowned people within the industry, David Davies and Errol Givans. David, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Bob. Yes, so I'm David Davies from Carter Retail Equipment. I've been in quality for probably over 20 years now. And I've known Temple for 10 of those years. I think we started working together sort of 10 years ago. So really good contacts there. From a quality point of view, I sort of started at not the bottom, but started with the apprenticeship route. It wasn't a formal apprenticeship then. It was very hard to get a formal apprenticeship. So you kind of got the trainee status. Slowly over the years, I was actually called the quality floater, which is not a very good terminology, but what that meant was when anyone was on holiday or on sick, I would come and fill their role. Sort of 10 years later and filled a training matrix, they asked me to manage the department. After that, I had a few roles from the chic point of view, including health and safety, environmental side of things, and then ended up at BSI where I met my good colleague Errol, and back to Carter Retail last year, and recently taken up a new position for the head of design, development and quality.
I like your terminology there, David, quality floater. That's really good. So, Errol.
Welcome and thank you for everybody. I made the privilege to sort of be part of this discussion. My story sort of starts way back in high volume production in a big factory, and I ended up as Bob as being my lecturer when I started my CQI journey, completing the level 3 and the level 5 diploma successfully, which was great. Worked at a number of other facilities, which all encompassed being exposed to the ISO 9000 series products as an internal auditor / quality engineer, eventually moving into a chic or quiche sort of, which was a consolidation of a number of roles, which was health and safety, quality and environmental. And all along the journey, I've been exposed to being audited by BSI on a consistent basis internally, until eventually going to another facility, a manufacturing technology centre in Coventry, again being audited by BSI, and then eventually decided to make the leap to become a full-time assessor, delivering a number of key products, which again has given me exposure to not only delivering assessments, but also being cognizant of being aware of the cost of poor quality elements from a business point of view, where you see opportunities creep in, again, and that's coming from an industrial background, and also the training that I completed under Temple, which I'm really grateful for, because Bob was my mentor and catalyst, which has ended up me sitting around the table with you guys now completing this podcast. So thank you for the opportunity.
So thanks for that. Really interesting, and it's great to be back working with you guys. And as we say, we're talking about cost of quality. And we're noticing lots of different applications of cost of quality. And normally it's terminated with the PAF model: prevention, appraisal and failure. And David, do you see a lot of that going on?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really easy to record the F. So everyone kind of records it in a way. They know when something goes wrong, but no one, or very minimal people, actually split it out into the prevention, appraisal and failure costs. Now, when I said it's very easy, actually a lot of companies that we've been to, or I've been to and audited and sort of done supplier audits, the best place to start is to go and look at their skips and have a look at what exactly is in the skips. That's always a good start, a good point. Speaking to the owner or the production manager, and just sort of going, do you know what's going in your skips? Do you know how much money you've wasted today? Shrinkage, any wastage, etc. From a PAF approach point of view, I've used this in many companies, and I've seen Some companies use it. We are using it to good effect where I am. And yeah, I think it's a really good tool. From that pendulum, you put the money into prevention and then your failure cost should come down. That's pretty much the task.
And yeah, you're right. It's good to start at clause 10.2 sometimes, non-conformance and corrective action, and work backwards and look at why it's being put in there in terms of prevention. And, you know, it all starts off with the basic. You know, the standard talks about efficiency and effectiveness. Efficiency, relationship between the results achieved and the resources used. And efficiency, the extent to which planned activities are realised and planned results are achieved. Do you agree, Errol? What kind of response do you get? It would be really interesting because obviously you see a wide range of applications in your role as an auditor for BSI.
It's a good point, Bob. With the delivery of the standard, there tends to be a large focus proportionally on ensuring that you cover the clauses. When you start to then dig beneath that to see fundamentally how stable the business is, you're absolutely right. The deliverables that come out of that will be profit and loss, but not always how much does it take for a business to achieve the P&L status, P&L being profit and loss. And then, as David quite eloquently alluded to in yourself, if you go to skips or waste streams within processes to audit them, that will paint a picture of how effective this overall process has been from its initial, might be a customer asking for a widget, for that widget to be produced throughout the production stream and then going out the door. By targeting certain elements within the standard in terms of non-conformance, I think non-conformance is an underplayed clause of the standard that people they'll address it, but they don't always draw the relationship or the correlation between non-conformance and process effectiveness. They'll just say that if something goes wrong, it's non-conformity. Yeah, that's true. But there's also an element of how effective is the input to process output to start with. If your processes are not effective and you get failures from the PAF, failure being key, there's an additional massive cost implication to that to be analysed and then to try and put it right. So from my professional point of view, I see that clause as being underplayed and not correlated between that and its relationship to the production side of things. If you understand the relationship and why it's important to get stability in any process, the output will be you'll have a profitable output at the end of it, not X amount of scrap going into the scrap bin, which has then got to be disposed of, right? Which eats into your profit and loss and margins, which means that your cost model's not right to start with. So that's one of the things I tend to look at. And it's interesting to see the feedback of when you challenge a director on it, how fundamentally their knowledge of their own systems are, because sometimes they can become sort of resistant because it shows that there's a gap there, you see, Bob. And I see it day in, day out. And to put it in context here, there are some significant figures of failure modes across the world because people haven't done their due diligence to find out how effective the processes are to start with. Does that make sense?
People, Errol, do you see, but people are not actually using the fundamental 7 principles of quality. Customer focus, and you've talked about leadership, engagement of people, identifying and using the process approach, making that concept of improvement, evidence-based decision-making, relationship management. And it's almost as though poor cost of quality becomes the norm. It's what we do. It's okay. It's part of our process. And what we would like to do as part of our podcast today is kind of discuss, but actually these are some of the stories that we've had. What is a quality cost? It's the cost of ensuring that delivered outputs are correctly maintained and with that concept of prevention. And very often you can talk to somebody like production level, high level in the organisation, and we say to them, what is the cost of quality? How many debit notes have we identified, say Q1 2025? How does that compare with the last quarter of 2024? And the amount of people that don't actually know their true cost of quality and the opportunities lost is horrendous because, it's difficult to send a letter out to a customer and put prices up. We all know, but that's challenging. So what we have to do is try and better manage our process and our risks and actions to create opportunities as well as our risks. David, do you see in your manufacturing role of quality manager, do you see that alive and kicking?
Yeah, so talking about the risks and the opportunities, it's definitely something from a process approach. It's something not many companies do, so they probably do it informally. But I know when we review our processes, whether that be 6 monthly or annually, etc., one of the things that we do is we have a process ownership approach. So the process owner should not only look at that process to see if it's correct or not, because things change, normally down to computer systems, but the previous risks highlighted the last time they reviewed the process, they should have mitigated the risks, or they should have mitigated some of the risks. And one of the things we ask is they should also look at all the opportunities that were arisen. And you won't take all of them into account, but some of them, especially, you'll have to sort of rag rate them. And also from a process approach, it's normally what I've seen is a quality manager in a room with a cup of tea. It used to be a cigarette in the hand back in the day as well. And, doing all these processes on their own. The quality, the BSI person or the auditor would come in and they would take, when I first started, they went to the pub. I remember that when I was 17. But now, we obviously don't see that anymore. I don't think that ever happened to me ever in my 3.5 years at BSI. But yeah, it's still, from the 45,001, there's the involvement of people as well. So I think that's really key, is to involve people. We've got a really good quality department at Carter's, and the people are very much involved in all the processes. So when we're coming to look at a new process, it's not just me on my own, it's looking at the wider department to start with, but then, the wider business and taking that into account. You spoke about leadership as well. Leadership is probably the most key clause, I think, in the whole of the standards. Now, it's only key if the information being fed into them is highlighting. So if you're just going to give them a big list of actions or problems, or cost of poor quality is within a big page, they're not going to look at it. What they want to know is, how does that affect me? What are the big stoppers? RAG status are big. If you've got an internal audit process, you've highlighted what the issue is. But what we're not doing, I say we, the wider quality culture, is we're not putting cost onto internal audit. So we'll have a finding, but we won't put the estimated cost, or how much is this going to cost us, even from time. How long is it taking us to close down this action? We'll put a time on it, put a cost on it.
The synthetic costs, there's the iceberg model, isn't there? There's over the water on the iceberg, what you see, and then there's under the water the synthetic costs, things like time, travel, logistics, material, time to rework it. And they're all due. See organisations actually using the prevention, appraisal, failure model to kind of use it as a tool of improvement.
You do, Bob, but I think it's more sporadic. It's reactive than being proactive about, as David's alluded to. If you're going to go down the PAF model route, right, the time you'll have to be able to optimise is in the design phase of anything before you go live on a productionisation. I think if you could capitalise on that element before you've gone live and take out all the non-value add waste elements to optimise the process initially before you start, then the appraisal element and the failure element will be less likely to be realised, because the process is more likely to be stable in the first place. But to get that concept over to people when you go into various businesses can be challenging, because they're not digging down into the weeds. But like you said, the synthetic cost is the underlying cost which businesses don't see until it gets to what I call a critical path element, when also now this big cost come out, bang, it's cost them X amount to scrap stuff off or rework it. They've got to have a budgetary or fiscal set aside and think, flipping, no, we didn't see that one coming. So we've got to equate that into our business model, and then we've got to achieve offsetting that cost. But if you track it back, like you're saying, that PAF, the P is critical. Get the prevention thing done, and if you have to exhaust it based on cost, obviously the cost for you to implement it, but it can offset you further costs down the road of the iceberg model, which you quite rightly alluded to, which the underlying cost can be incalculable for any business.
It's quite easy to work late at night and do correction and corrective action. But what about the front end where it talks about quality planning, managing effective processes around design, bringing in the external providers and their skills to support prevention, engaging with that clause 7.16 on using knowledge within the organisation. And Errol, that word P, what you just said, staff training, quality audit planning, effective audit planning, preventative maintenance, quality improvement programs all fall under the concepts of prevention. And then, Errol, what about appraisal? Do you see like the normal in-process inspection? Do you see that effectively applied, Errol?
I wouldn't say, I see it applied effectively is another discussion point, because the appraisal is where you're building in an opportunity to then appraise a good or bad condition part. A product might be something a subcomponent, because what you're trying to do is offset to get to a failure mode if you can, before it gets to near enough shipping out the door. Can we appraise it? Can we evaluate it? Can we concess it? A concessionable condition? Yes, no. And then the process will allow it in a linear sequential to move forward. But again, the impetus should be, as you said, training, process approach, developing the prevention. The prevention would be the absolute optimal time to take out things, so you don't have to rely on an inspection program, because inspection, unfortunately, can be subject to allowing failures to progress on, even though you've got an appraisal gate in your process, and it can get to a failure mode, or it could be shipped internally or externally.
Because detection tolerates waste, prevention avoids waste. And what about you, David? You're in manufacturing. Do you see an effective approach to process inspection? And what about, David, if we talk about clause 8.6, product release, and it says in the standard to planned arrangements, do you feel those planned arrangements are effectively communicated, and is the levels of competency there?
So if you take where I am currently at Carter's, we're actually not in manufacturing anymore. So we buy from suppliers, but we're heavily involved in their manufacturing. So we have people on the ground, we have boots on the ground. I have people working for me personally abroad who work for me, who report to me. And, I go out and visit these companies very frequently, 4 or 5 the times a year, if we're on Teams calls with them. And what we do is we very much do the appraisal approach. So we do a lot of audits, and we do, I'm not ashamed to say, but we do a full PDI 100% check at the end. I know 100% inspection is only 80% effective, but at the moment we value our customers, and we do not want them to find or detect anything. So that's why we're putting all of our waste or all of our input into making sure that our product is on time and in full.
You see a better approach in Europe to the UK?
I think there's some things that they can learn from us, and that's what we're doing. So we're going over there and we're helping them. And there's some things that ultimately we're learning from them. So it's more of a partnership approach. They're not suppliers, they're definitely partners. We, like I say, we have an audit approach. We use a software called Safety Culture. It used to be called iAuditor. I don't know if you've seen it. So although it's very much yes, no kind of answer, it digs down. We need photographs. That's one of the things from a 9001 point of view. When I've looked at audits on a lot of the clients that I went to, it was still very much paper and pen, or they would type up the paper and pen afterwards, very basic clipboard scenario. So we're trying to move away from that. I like everything to be more visual. very much visual management. So there isn't really a short answer to that. All I can say is, like the standard, we're continuously improving, and every sort of month and every year we're the actions reduce, but then new, fresh actions come up. So that's why we're looking at the prevention model, and we're investing into design and making sure we get it right first time.
Do you see there's equal amounts or more spent on the front end, the prevention, or do you see people quite happy to spend hour after hour and put a team of people around with an 8 discipline report in their hand and, guys, fill that in for an hour, 8 of us, 1 hour, how much does that cost? Do you see the front end or the back end?
I think it's very unusual to see people investing in the front end. I'm not saying it's not being done, but officially people are sort of easier or happier to assume it would be okay, assume that it worked last time. But last time it worked, you had an employee on the shop floor who had been working for 25 years, who never takes a sick leave, and then he retired, and no one ever looked into, trying to grab all that information before they go. And it's sometimes with a lack of process, you rely on people, and it's nothing wrong with relying on people, because you should invest in your people. We have fantastic people here, but it's definitely a case of, from a process approach, how can we help people to do their jobs more efficiently and make sure that they're happier and we're happier, that the cost comes down.
Clause 7.1.6, organisational knowledge. Endorsing there what Dave just said, in an organisation with ISO 9001, there was a situation recently where the maintenance guy left the business quite abruptly. He gave some notice in because he come into some inheritance. True story, one of our true stories. And, an organisation with an ISO from a certified organisation, from an accredited certification body. Anyway, this guy left the business. He'd been there 30-odd years, and he could walk past a machine and just know if it wasn't running properly by the sound of it. Anyway, he left that business quite abruptly, Errol, and within 10 days, half the shop was standing because people couldn't get it put right. So do you see knowledge effectively audited, clause 7.1.6?
That's a good question, Bob. That's a good question. So what you'll tend to find is experiential, organisational knowledge, right, are sometimes glossed over until it becomes what they call critical path, or what they call single point failure. So what you've just described is a single point failure for a business that didn't effectively not only audit organisational knowledge, take steps proportionally against risk, evaluate the risk of that guy's role functionally, what he actually concluded within the business or completed, right, for his maintenance activity. And because that wasn't effectively deployed, him being out the business highlighted and created a catastrophic failure for that business because it came to a standstill. Now, there are a number of steps that they could have taken, right, which would have been looking at his role, what's the contingency, what's the backup, right? Are we looking at his age profile and maturity and saying, well, he's at a certain disposition, and if he was to be taken out of the business, where does that leave us? And when we do a risk eval, SWOT and pestle analysis from a risk-based point of view, if that was effectively done, they would have took steps to then offset, mitigate, reduce that particular instance by apprenticeship, putting a number of people in and dispositioning the knowledge to spread it out, including looking at plant and equipment and manufacturing equipment, looking for what they call mean time before failure. What does he do in terms of maintenance?
In the word there, catastrophic failure, well, obviously that equals customer impacts. So in terms of customer impacts, that's going to result in a complaint, or it's going to result in loss of profit, or it's going to impact warranty and potential penalties, or even worse, it's going to introduce non-value added rework into the organisation and potential reputation impacts. So looking after organisations' knowledge is crucial. And what about you, David? Do you see your organisation managing knowledge? Do you actually see in your industry knowledge being captured? You know, everybody talks about training and competence and certificates and everything like that. But we're seeing more and more potential not capturing the knowledge within the organisation as well.
Well, I'll take you back 10 years, Bob, when you were in front of me and you had a whiteboard and you mentioned organisational knowledge, the clause.
Was it that long ago?
It was. And you said, all you do is you write all the tasks at the top, and then you put all the people going down the side, and then you literally put an X next to who can actually do which tasks. Let's take us for an example. We produce standard operating procedures and installation manuals for all of our products. Now we produce them in English, which makes sense because we're in England. But we started selling to North America and Canada, so then overnight we needed to put everything in French. Now, we did not have an organisational knowledge, or we did not know who in the business could speak French, who could convert that to French. So one of the things that, we're looking at is what can we capture, who is critical, succession planning, etc. Now, we've actually taken on 2 apprentices recently, design and quality apprentices. They're both fantastic. They're doing really well. They both won Apprentice of the Month this month as well. So excellent news for us and them. And yeah, with that mindset, with the mindset of there isn't a formal organisational knowledge chart. It was something when I was at BSI I found difficult to audit because there's not really a mandatory documented evidence that you have to require, which I think is a shame, really. I think definitely we should get something in there for you ISO people the next time you update the ISO standards. But yeah, it's something that most companies informally do. They'll say, Malcolm or Jane, there's only them who can do those roles, and it's spoken about, and then a year later someone will go, Malcolm and Jane, no one can do those roles, and it's difficult to formally get approval for new people sometimes. It's everything's working, so why would you look at succession planning? Well, it's quite obvious why you would, but to highlight that to top management sometimes, that's where your management review comes in as well. From a risk point of view, you can identify that. But the short answer is, I find, if we're looking at ISOs, it doesn't really encourage people to actually document it, which is a shame.
Because if you look at other standards, for example, IATF, International Automotive Task Force 16949, that does have a mandatory requirement for cost of quality in it. So it's a good point what you raised there, because technically you can use best practice from other standards to kind of support your business. And it's all about SQUEB, skills, knowledge, experience and behaviour. Errol, coming to you on this, if I may. Moving on now from knowledge, Errol, do you see many organisations doing cost analysis in terms of, the cost of direct failure and the indirect cost of failure? Do you see that much going on, Errol?
That's a good question again, Bob. You'll find it tends to be reactive. So react to a failure mode, and if you push them to obviously explore that it is picked up, but it's not always effectively deployed using data and data analytics, because it takes time and effort. And it also, that there's a correlation for that. And then what I mean by that is the correlation will relate to how effective the processes are to start with, which relates back to how effective the design or the prevention elements are. If you get the front end bit right and you run your data analytics through the process, you should see a correlation between your top line sales going out the door and low non-value add waste and cost of poor quality. They should be a lower ratio, but not a lot of companies will take the time to measure it. Define, measure, analyse, improve, control to make. They'll only do it reactive when stuff ends up in the bin and someone's got to approve or sign the waste and scrap off, and they go, right, how much was that? And you go, right, we threw X amount of ton of stuff in the bin. And then they do the data analytics backwards by thinking, well, why did that happen and how much we got to sign off? there's a correlation then to that linked to your bottom line P&L, because again, that will erode your profitability because your systems and processes are not always effective, and yet it takes time to do that. But the benefit will be if you get the front end bit right and you translate that through into final assembly product going out the door and all the rest of it, you're not going to have to worry about how much scrap, non-value add and cost of poor quality the business is currently absorbing, because the systems are stable and that you get what they call R&R, reproducibility, repeatability in the processes, right? And yet it takes effort to do the data analytics, but the value you'll get from it is how effective are your systems that throughout the business, top to bottom, horizontal and vertical, how do they integrate well together or not? And then overall, what's it cost us totally as a business, right? If you can get that to that stage, plus you've got good margins set and good cost control, you should see what you intend to make in terms of profit out the business. Does that make sense?
And David, back to you. Errol mentioned Deming, and the creation of the Plan, Do, Check, Act. Going back to the basics, in the standard of ISO 9001, Plan, Do, Check, Act is there. When did you last see it effectively used in terms of planning what we're going to do it, check what we've done, and act on the improvements? When did you actually see that? Is it like a living and breathing tool and technique, do you see?
It is. I do see it a lot, actually. It's kind of a simple process. Now, most companies don't really buy in a management system. They create their own, from an Excel point of view, or they use other systems, sort of normally inherited and shared and swapped between companies sometimes. And most of those systems are based on the Plan, Do, Check, Act, process. Where it comes into, to many companies is it's probably not that they don't know they follow that process. They just naturally do it. Probably the check-in bit is something that's a bit subjective business to business, because some businesses rely on their suppliers to check and you get a COC or certificate of conformity from the supplier. And then some companies, they don't necessarily look at what the customer wants. So the customer, you've got that contract review. Who does it in the company? Is it the sales team? Is it the design team? Is it the procurement team? Who actually does it? From a Plan, Do, Check, Act point of view, I think the check-in is sometimes as important as the planning and the doing, because you'll learn from that and you'll sort of and obviously that feeds into the act, of course. The lessons learned afterwards.
8.22 in the standard, determining customer requirements, and one of them is those considered necessary by the organisation, and that section provides an opportunity for prevention and to manage effective, which we've talked about, output. So, Errol, do you see that clause effectively audited in your experience?
Is QFD, quality function deployment, deployed? Hardly ever. You'll hardly ever see it. But if you get the House of Quality QFD model, use that to ascertain key requirements, what type of product you're producing, voice of the customer, which is critical. Actually, what does the customer want? Defining that out. Then linking that to what they call VOP, voice of the process. Is the voice of the customer and the voice of the process, is there synergy? So you can actually produce what the customer wants effectively against what type of business you're in, your actual processes, if they're stable enough to produce what you're looking for to get the desired outcome. Now, again, there are tools and techniques which people do deploy, but if you do the front-end bit, get the front-end heavy lifting done first, QFD, quality function deployment, plan, and then do the Plan, Do, Check, Act. How effectively have you translated a customer requirement? Do we dig into the minutiae to find out what the customer's actually asking us for? And then once we've got that translation, we link it then to saying, can we actually produce what that customer wants, their wants and needs? Can we produce it effectively at the right cost and in a consistent manner? I think that's one of the keys where we don't always, if we don't get it right, there's an effect to that, which can be scrap, rework, dissatisfaction, customer not happy, blah, 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 and all the rest of it. That's where the COP thing drops in then. And then we've got to write that and correct it to rebuild that expectation from the customer, if that makes sense, Bob, yeah?
Strategic direction. that links to quality policy, that links to objectives, that links to all the people having an understanding, including induction. Do you feel that the organisation connects cost of poor quality to, a top level activity where there's a strategy to make it better?
That's a good point. So I'd say if you embody the spirit of the standard in terms of you want to develop a stable company, right, to produce product and or service effectively to meet your customer requirements, that will be driven from the strategic high-level sort of management team, right? They'll make the decisions and then they'll trickle and filter it down. Now, there's some assumptions made with that. Is do the actual senior management team know the business well enough and the sector and the market well enough to know what the customer expectations and requirements are? Some of the key directives will just be, we want to make X profit. Okay, great. That's always a motivator for any business. But actually understanding your customer base and what the customer demands are and the market sector is absolutely critical to understand what they'll actually want from you as a company. Now, the other thing is, can you meet those expectations? If you do your effective front-end bit, you should be able to translate those customer requirements in, and strategically the management will support and provide the product, the service, the infrastructure, the training, the resource, and all of that. And the quality aspects should filter it down throughout the business from the top down and bottom up. So you should get a convergence of expectations that everybody's pulling in the same direction for the success of the company, but also to achieve the satisfaction of your customers consistently. Because if you don't get that sort of recipe right, you'll end up with dissatisfaction and what they call attrition. And attrition can creep into a business. The next minute you're losing customers hand over fist, and it's very hard then to win that relationship back, right? To then support the strategic direction of the company, if that makes sense, for the benefit of the greater good.
Coming back to appraisal, do you think we focus enough on opportunity? For example, I was involved in an organisation and we was looking at calibration and we was looking at cost of calibration, and they got an awful lot of kit and they was getting non-conformities because, they couldn't keep up with the regime of annual calibration. So we said to them, well, why are you doing it annually? Well, the standard says we've got to do it annually. Where in the standard does it say we've got to do it annually? It talks about defined period. And, we looked at the calibration results and there was no findings of any inspection kit out of calibration that should have been taken out of use. Do you feel, David, in your manufacturing, talking of the pound notes, but there's enough opportunity considered as well as failure?
Does it have to be UCAS? Can you have traceable? Does it have to, the frequency? How often does it need to happen? It needs to be based on a risk-based approach, even from just how clumsy the person who's holding the vernier or whatever you get calibrated. Are they likely to drop it? Are you using slip gauges, etc.? How often do those, gauges get sent away? From an opportunity point of view, if there was a process, then the process owner would look at the process, the calibration process. One of the things that they should look at is from a cost point of view. How much is it costing me to complete this calibration? Now, we moved, like I said, into the North American market where UL come and audit us. Now, pretty much my budget went out the window because everything had to be 17025. And so sometimes you look at the customer requirements or the actual compliance element in order to achieve the customer requirements. And someone would have potentially reduced the frequency and reduced the actual status from UCAS to or 17025 to traceable. But then if your customer or your compliance, you need it, then I think you've got to take everything into account. It's not just a one size fits all, unfortunately.
Contract review and understanding clause 8.2 area, determining customer requirements. Should that have not been reviewed at that point rather than, when your budget gets hit because you've got to go to calibrated equipment against ISO 17025. Does that mean that we've a better point to review front-end customer requirements and expectations?
Yeah, of course it should. If we just carry on with the theme, I've asked pretty much hundreds of suppliers or clients about UL. Have you ever considered, UL? And people say yes, but we're not really sure what to do, etc. So I think there's a little bit of awareness needed there as well. So the customer doesn't always give you everything you need to comply. They kind of expect that you are the experts because you're selling your product to them. And if you're, achieving their, if you want to be selling to them, they kind of expect A, that it works, and B, that you're fully compliant. So they won't give you a list of everything you need to be compliant of. So when you get those customer contracts or the terms and conditions, they won't tell you what to do. Unfortunately, they will guide you, and there will be some, maybe there's some service level agreements that needs to be between you. But ultimately, you've got to work it out yourself sometimes. So that's why you need a really good team. It's not a one-person approach. It's a bit of a collab with the purchasing, the compliance, quality, design. It's coming together and having
multidisciplinary.
It's getting, who's owning this project. Let's scope out the project, part of that project.
We're talking about now auditing and the effectiveness of auditing. And ISO 19011 talks about management engagement and support, tracking corrective action and improvement, focusing on that risk-based approach. Errol, what are you seeing on the quality of the first-party audit regime?
Good question. If you're completing any kind of audit program, right, the best examples I can give is to be brutally honest with your own system in terms of auditing, not being bold to audit effectively, right, and not being afraid to where you've got to raise and detect non-conformities to do it, and to do it in a professional manner to help people understand if there's a deviation or non-compliance. We need to assess it, mitigate, find out what the impacts are, correct it, prevent it, and move on. Third parties come in, first party audits. Auditing is going to have to be, some extent, is going to be subjective based on who's doing the auditing, right? And their approach, their experience and things of that nature, right? So the depth you go to in terms of an audit will give you a better indication of how effectively the objective evidence provides, supports you making a decision on whether something's compliant or not. If you shortchange it, right, there can be things missed, not detected, ineffective and inefficiencies glossed over and missed. And fundamentally, that will underpin then the program of an audit. It's not doing what you intended it to achieve in terms of completion of an audit program effectively and going to what they call the depth and breadth of the audit program.
So, Bob, in your opinion, if an organisation wants to start measuring and optimising the cost of quality, what steps should they take? How do we fix this?
First of all, start with what actually do the interested parties want? Well, they want profit. They want an organisation that's doing it right first time, running effectively. They want effective use of processes, risk-based approach, so they, again, do it right first time. I would suggest leadership take seriously their commitment and they plant strategy. They focus on induction of new staff, so it comes in right from the start. They ensure that the roles and responsibilities are clearly defined. For example, what's the responsibility of a supervisor? What's the responsibility of a team leader? So that there's some definitive competency, level of competence defined as able to apply skills and knowledge. Additionally, people are aware of what they're focused have to do, and there's a good level of dot control around the organisation. Equally, there's good operational controls around customer requirements, design, and also making sure that the external providers do their job right first time and take accountability for what they're delivering into the organisation. I'd also, David, in answer to your question there, ensure that standard operating procedures, I'm thinking here clause 8.5, are clear and understood and people know what they're doing. Additionally, I would suggest that product release and that column within the organisation skills matrix is made bold because those are the people, the most important people who release the product or service before it goes out the door. You know, they're the most critical players within an organisation. There's a segregation of non-conforming output. There's so much unintended non-conforming output shipped to the customers. And additionally, you know, what makes a process in terms of what are the success measures an organisation can produce, and leading on to that factual approach to decision making, which brings us on to the effectiveness of internal audits. We talked about it, but what are the effectiveness of the internal audits? And it's a suggestion, but potentially we don't do an audit, internal audit, without a pound note sign on it. Because people, you know, management, yes, it's going in the right box. Yes, the measurement equipment traceable is calibrated. Yes, the operator is trained. Actually, are we making any money? And how much time are we spending doing rework? How much time are we spending on doing it again? That's how an organisation can measure success of quality and right first time. And also making sure that the management review has a feature in it, cost of quality. Not cost of poor quality, but cost of quality. And then these are some of the concepts in answer to your question that I would suggest finally.
I think you've just hit a really important facet about accountability and focus on credit notes. You bring somebody in to demonstrate how much a credit note has been raised from a financial perspective, and then link that to the additional costs throughout the business, linked to COPQ of all the other departments that it's touched, that had to be involved in that with non-value add, to then raise a credit note, which is money that you're having to dish out off your bottom line. I think it's a really good example. And also developing a program just to understand what the cost of quality is to any business, as well as the cost of when we don't get it right. Cost of poor quality, aka credit notes being raised days, weeks, months, and all the people that are involved in raising that. I think it's a really good point that you've highlighted. And then see if there's the appetite from the senior people. On a management review, is COPQ even on the agenda? No. Credit notes will be, but you say, well, you know, do you realise credit notes is a link to COPQ, which has cost us X amount? I think it's a really good way of highlighting it to the senior people, to then seek if there's the appetite then to explore the COPQ, cost of poor quality and cost of quality program within any business.
Just from a personal journey, sort of 10, 12 years ago, although I was performing internal audits, I didn't really know what I was auditing. I could audit the process, but I didn't really understand the standard. The ISO clauses were a bit alien to me. We lost a really good member of our team, my manager, and we lost her to BSI actually. So I started my journey with Temple with the training, which was absolutely fantastic. And yeah, just if there's anyone listening who doesn't, you know, is in or was in a similar situation to myself, it's not hard. The clauses do make sense when they're explained to you properly. And yeah, you can use it to advance your own knowledge of the business. Just specifically on internal auditing, you're speaking to people in the business that you wouldn't normally speak to. Just give it a try, give it a go. From the ISO point of view, Nothing scary at all. Just give it a go, really.
Just to say my thanks for everybody around the table, and that it's a very complex element that we've looked at, but we've applied a common sense approach, and we haven't used too many acronyms. The COPQ thing, people know that to death now. They know what cost of poor quality or cost of quality is, and we try to engage with everybody, across the spectrum. So it's, not just a bunch of senior people, but also up and down throughout the business, young and old, because the Q word touches everybody from the day, you go out to procure a summit, you go down to your local Tesco's, the quality's there for you buying any product and services, it's there. So everybody gets touched by the Q, and what I mean by the Q word is the quality word, right? So we've had a really great discussion with an august body of people to help us then dissect it up. So my thanks for being allowed to complete that. And I'll just hand it over to Bob, and he'll do his final thoughts for you guys.
If you would like any more information, we've got a white paper on our website, templeqms.com. And we wish you all the best with your quality endeavours, and look forward to our next Temple Talks podcast. So keep in touch. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for listening to Temple Talks. If you have any questions or would like to find out more about Temple Quality Management Systems and their training and consultancy services, head over to templeqms.com today.